welcome to Navigating Change, the education podcast from Teibel Inc. I'm Pete Wright, and I'm here with Howard Teibel and a very special guest to talk about the underappreciated power of incremental change and what it means to become a mature organization in your institution. To learn more about our work in education, head over to teibelinc.com. While there, you can subscribe to this show for free. Just click the blue button, and we'll keep you updated whenever we post new shows. In just a few weeks, the Western Association of College and University Business Officers annual conference is set to convene in San Francisco, California. The program is full of incredible speakers and events, kicking off Sunday, April 24th, with a keynote by former Secretary of State Dr. Condoleezza Rice, followed by a catalog of university presidents and business officers who are leading the charge for change in their institutions. You can find out more about the conference at WACUBO.org. Ruth Johnston is Associate Vice President at University of Washington. As such, she serves as Chief of Staff for Planning and Management and leads and facilitates UW's Organizational Excellence, working across the university, leading and facilitating strategic planning, process improvements, developing future leaders, measuring performance, and helping to manage change. That background makes Ruth the perfect person to join us for this conversation. Ruth Johnston, welcome to Navigating Change.
You know, even if Ruth and I were not presenting together at WACUBO, we would absolutely have her back on the show, and we said that last time. And that's because you and I are kindred spirits, right, Ruth?
Absolutely, Howard.
All right, thank you. I was hoping you would say that. I didn't tell you to say that. So let's talk about something that is in a statement from the workshop we're going to be doing at WACUBO. It says, business officers continue to explore ways to improve efficiency and effectiveness. However, most progress is incremental. And one reason for the lack of transformational progress in most institutions is that they don't have internal resources dedicated. So here's the truth for me, Ruth, is that even if it's accurate that most schools don't have sufficient resources, I think this is more of a symptom than a root cause, right? So having more resources to do the work, or having a resource like yourself to do the work that you do, is really important. But it's really a lack of commitment to focusing on transformational change or sufficient commitment. Because I think that most people would say we do have a commitment to change. However, I think we often don't have a sufficient commitment to something other than incrementalism. And I'm curious what you think about that.
Well, I think transformational change is just really, really hard. It takes more than resource. It takes an amazing amount of will. It takes somebody who's willing to risk their position if things don't go well. Transformational change often doesn't go well. So, where do you start? Well, continuous improvement is all about incrementalism, if you will. And I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that, except that, like right now, we have 27 different projects that we know of, and that's just too many. It's really hard to keep track, even though we're a major university. But we can see the progress in each of these 27, which will end up helping to become transformational. In some ways, what we're doing is building the capacity for change and the buzz that we are going to change. So by having too many, it's hard, but not having many is also hard, because we have to create this energy and the will to want to change, which I think through success is going to lead to bigger changes.
You know, your comment about incrementalism is not bad, and I totally agree with that, because it's so easy to interpret one is good and the other one's bad. That somehow, if we don't focus on quote unquote transformation, which is such a buzzword, incrementalism is another way of saying here are the steps we have to take to get there. But sometimes it's just that we don't even have the larger term vision. And I think the bigger issue, if we talk about root cause versus symptoms, is the will to put these things in place. And it's what you were talking about, which is this is hard work. And sometimes it demands at every level of the institution for people being willing to speak truth to power. And that is not the sole determinant. But if you think about what stops institutions from making big change, is that it's a risk. it's a risk to step forward and say, this is unacceptable, or saying, we are not where we need to be. In some cases, it's just easier to go with the flow.
It's much easier to go with the flow. I think especially with shared governance, which I think everybody's wrestling with. What is the definition of shared governance? Where does it end and start? At our university, we are using activity-based budgeting or responsibility-centered management. So all of a sudden, the money, which used to be all managed centrally, is going back to the schools and colleges.
So that that concept's been around for a long time. Are you finding that is helping reshape how people are talking about their areas and their commitments? Because that's a big commitment to put that in place. Investment of people's time, energy, resources, money. And what you hope for is that on the other side of that is that people, it's causing different conversations to happen. Are you seeing that happen?
Totally. Absolutely. Every dean is now having to manage in a very different way. And most of the deans weren't necessarily brought up to be finance wizards, and they need to be much more aware of that and capable, because their money is coming back because of the classes that are taught. So the tuition dollars go, for the most part, back to the schools, colleges. So now it means that they have to be very well aware of who's teaching, who's not, buyouts, the research money. There's so many different sources of funds, and they just didn't have to pay attention to it in the way they have to now. And of course, our state is one of the ones that has basically divested from higher education funding, and the research dollars are down. So I think the challenges for the academics are much greater. And getting back to the shared governance piece, resources is obviously a leadership requirement. Shared governance gets to advise on all of that. But in the end, if somebody doesn't want to teach, their load or whatever, it has to be a decision that is also resource-based.
This is building accountability.
Right. It absolutely is. And we're seeing it more and more. We also are seeing that people are doing things that aren't penciling out. And so they're having to make some pretty hard decisions if they're going into deficit, what they're going to do about that.
Like what programs or services they're going to stop running, kind of thing?
Exactly. Right. Or clinics. Higher ed is really good about expanding ideas. We love new ideas, but we don't like stopping things.
In some ways, it's a lot easier for me to come in as an outsider and say the things I say. If I was an internal person, I'd be part of the internal politics. And I think that's what makes your work even more impactful, but also more challenging. So, when you think about trying to give advice, for example, to another set of leaders to say, build capacity internally to take some of these changes so that you don't always have to rely on somebody from the outside or quote unquote an expert. What would be the first step someone should take to build internal capacity if you were to think way back at the beginning of when you started this, because you've been doing this for a long time?
Building capacity is one of our strongest values in our organizational excellence work. We don't want to go into an area that's not going to have the ability to keep it going. So how do you do that? Well, we ideally want to go into a unit that has somebody from the get-go who really likes this stuff, likes process improvement or likes strategy or isn't afraid to get in the middle of a conflict or likes Kanban boards. That's a tool that I use, which is a visual way to show workflow.
Yeah.
And it uses stickies, and you build a tool so that you can see that you're making progress. As I just said, higher ed loves to create ideas. It doesn't necessarily like to either stop things or get things done sometimes. We're in the world of our head. So by using a visual flow to show the activity, then you can see that things get done. And it's so easy, and people love doing it. We'll be talking about it at the WACUBO workshop. When something's easy, somebody can get excited and they want to do it. And so what I like to do is give them things that are simple to use.
That's great.
So like an activity scope, it's just a one-page visual that talks about what the activity is. something really simple, not something that's 5 or 10 pages long.
And what that does is it actually allows for the transition for them to use it. To me, that's the foundation of simple. We can make things so unnecessarily complicated, and sometimes people just need a flow or a simple process to follow, and it jumpstarts a process. To me, the foundation of when I watch you do your work or engage with folks, and when I do the work that we do, I often find when we're at our best, it's about jumpstarting something, right? It's not about doing it even. It's about being an enabler. And that to me, I was thinking about what really excites me about our work. When work is going really well, when we're really contributing to change, it's when people are willing to trust us to try new things. And what jazzes you? So I was thinking about that this morning. It's like, as I think about stuff that is a pain to do, everyone's got parts of their job that are a pain. And then there's the work that gets us really excited. What comes to mind for you that's really exciting about your work when you just are so totally jazzed?
Well, last week we held what's called an Organizational Excellence Showcase. It was the second one. You got to see it last year. And we had about 55 posters, and it was all about what's excellent at the university. So we had schools and colleges, and probably 500 people came to learn from each other. To me, that really jazzes me.
No, because you get to see that, okay, what you're up to is something that people want. It's tangible. So, don't you stand around there sometimes and look around and say, why aren't more people doing this? Doesn't that sometimes enter your head? It's like, in some ways, the more we do this work, the more obvious it is. So how do we translate that for folks to make it easy? That, to me, is the fundamental challenge.
Well, it always helps if there's some type of reason behind doing it, right?
That's right. So what is the reason for your showcase?
Because we want to build capacity. We want people to get excited about what they can do. We reinvent the wheel all the time at the university.
Yeah.
We have central administration processes that then every school and college have to figure out how to match to. Makes no sense. So let's say onboarding staff, right? We might have an onboarding checklist that comes out of HR, but then every school college has to have their own unique onboarding checklist to get them familiar with their school or college. We don't do things wing to wing. And I spent 2.5 years in the School of Nursing helping at a very difficult time, and then went to the Tacoma campus to Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences to help them with shared governance and to create some improved processes. And I learned firsthand the deep divide between central administration and the schools and colleges, and how we don't even know what each other is doing and how we can be helpful. Making those kinds of links is really exciting to me. I have always considered myself kind of a linker. Somebody has this idea, I want them to learn from this person's idea, so that makes it easier for them.
Yeah. You make connections for folks and bring people together. And that deep chasm between central administration and the units, or a system office and the actual schools. But I got to tell you, it gets even worse, because if you work within any division, there is those chasms within the divisions themselves.
Absolutely.
And it's the difference between trying to get work done and being able and willing to step back and say, how can we be better? And I think fundamentally what you and I focus on with folks is we are the reminder that it's important to step back and reflect. And that, when I think about this idea of building capacity, and I thought, okay, where did that start? So, it's one thing for you to have a concept. It's another thing for leadership to say, we're doing this. And would you agree that no matter how passionate you are about this, if your leadership doesn't consider that a core value and want to make it central to the work, it's not going to happen?
I've never had more support for doing this work in my career than I do now. It's amazingly exciting. And cool. There are so many people who are excited about this. So when the president, the provost, switched over basically last spring, and the interims then became permanent almost. The president is now permanent. The provost should be shortly, we hope. They said, we haven't been paying enough attention to the infrastructure at the university for many, many years. And so we're going to create a program called Transforming Administration. And that started basically last spring, and lots of support from them, continued support from them. We have a very active leadership group who tackles the various projects. We're out on campus saying what's broken, what needs to be fixed. Campus is more than happy to tell us. So one of our big initiatives right now is to create a common set of service standards in central administration. It sounds so incredibly basic, but we don't have them. Probably most universities don't have them,
That's
especially
right.
of the size that we are. And so we put together a campus-wide team. They were delighted to serve people who really care about service. They've come up with a set of policy guidelines, and now we're going to start to roll it out. And, some are really excited about it. Our advancement people, our faculty senate chair, they can't wait to see this happen. And then there's others who say, I totally believe in it, but we don't have enough resource. Or what about the peak times? Or compliance is really important. Services also, but maybe compliance some people think is more important than service. So we're going to have a long way to go, but I think we'll be able to build it into, this culture of service is what it's all about. Service to our students, service to our faculty, service to each other. It's really pretty exciting to me.
I was reading The State of Higher Education is written up by Grant Thornton. They do one every year. And they have a particular section in this document that, as you were talking, I think is a really simple headline for what most schools are going through. And they talk about it from a maturity standpoint, moving from adolescence to adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
And in many ways, I think if we tell the truth about process and how we work and getting things done, we've got the most amazing outcomes we produce between the learning students get and the research that's done. But as I've been saying for years, if you lift the hood up and you look underneath, it's a mess.
It's a mess.
It's a mess. And it has a lot to do with, and by the way, that's true for so many large and small institutions, is that we've learned how to deliver often on the backs of people, right? So
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
But fundamentally, this concept of moving from adolescence to adulthood is really about taking this seriously, that we want to have an infrastructure that people feel connected to, feel that they can contribute to, and are working together through this. And as you mentioned before, shared governance is one of those challenges, but it's the thing that's not going away. So we just have to figure out how we're going to get better at that. For some people, they might think, well, maybe even some corporate board members, why can't we rethink that? Well, you can get better at shared governance. However, it's never going away. That's the model. Just like in our country, this idea of checks and balances to make it better. But as you can see in our country, it's the same kind of dilemma. It slows things down. So you and I are going to be together at WACUBO, and I think we got some really exciting new things to talk about. The overarching conversation is about building internal capacity. And your experience and my experience is probably scary. It's over 50 years of experience in this work. That's a scary thought.
Maybe even more.
I'm being kind to both of us. And ideas, tips, tools to implement. So practical things people take away. Why don't you just let people know a little bit about what are some of the things that you want to talk about and you're going to share with people at WACUBO?
Well, in a way, you were just talking about maturity, going from adolescence to adulthood. And one of the things I'm building now with my staff is a maturity model, which is intended to take an organization that is just starting all the way up to that adulthood. And what are the things that people need to do in each stage in order to be effective, so that it makes it easier for people, whether it is like my group, or even organizational excellence. We're only 2 years old, so we're still in the baby stage, up to an organization that is much more mature. And mature doesn't always mean healthy. but what are the aspects of health in each of those so people can know better how to achieve it? You said it's a mess underneath the cover. I think it's a well-intentioned mess. So my hope is to make it a little bit less messy because we have good people who simply just don't know how to do it. So that's what we're going to talk about in terms of the maturity model.
That's very cool. Yeah, so it's interesting because it's so easy to ascribe a value judgment when you make statements, when I made a statement about it being a mess. I think we just got to be willing to say these things and not hear it as, give people the goodwill and knowing that everybody truly is doing the best they can. And the nature of the work it's just hard to do that. So the maturity model is one example. From the point of view of what I hope that you and I will be leading, you'll be leading specific things that you're doing at your university. And then there's some things I've been doing around the country in terms of helping people really look at change, both from a personal standpoint, but also from an institutional standpoint. And how do you support yourself and others through that change? It's a message that many people have heard, but I think you can't remind them enough. Because, 9 times out of 10, Ruth, I come away from a workshop that I'm leading, and I'm so painfully aware that what I'm talking about is not rocket science and often common sense, but that kind of common sense gets lost because we're over busy and we don't take the time to step back and ask these kinds of questions. So one of the things that you and I will engage in is how do we deal with people and change around change at a personal and institutional level? And also the big one, the new thing I've been talking a lot about is this idea of getting people on the bus. If you ask, the majority of people, we need to get everybody on the bus. I'll tell you that's not true. You don't need to get everybody on the bus. No. And I think we behave from that place and focus on the wrong people, and that's why we get stalled. So I'm going to be talking about how you can rethink that so you can actually get momentum on these larger projects. And then we're going to do some exercises with folks to make it really exciting. So what else do you want people to know about or where they can be looking? Because I'd love people to be able to see the kind of work that you're doing. If they were going to go to your organization, where should they be going?
They go to the University of Washington homepage and then Google TAP. TAP.
Sometimes these acronyms don't work. That one works well.
It's funny because we can do everything from it's a TAP project to we're tapped out, which sometimes happens too. But the TAP website and then Organizational Excellence, and we're building all the time the website, but there's some tools there, and you'll hear you can read our various services, and the podcast that I did for WACUBO is listed there as well.
Very cool. And, I can tell you that when I'm out there traveling and sharing with people work that's happening in different places, I often bring up the work that you're doing because people look at that and go, man, we got to start thinking like this. So you are a leader in this conversation and you are ahead of the pack. And it's really meant to say that with the amount of time and years you've invested in this, it's really paying off. And now I think people are paying attention more than they ever have. Aren't you finding that to be true? There's much more interest today than there ever was in this.
There's more than I've ever seen.
That's awesome.
And people really want to learn. It's fantastic.
Well, I can't wait to spend time with you and be with you again at the conference at WACUBO. And looking forward to our time with that. Let me turn it back to Pete to take us out.
Howard and Ruth are among the speakers at this year's WACUBO annual conference. They'll be presenting Cultivating Organizational Excellence together, Day 1, April 24th at 2 p.m. They're leading this conversation around organizational maturity, defining organizational health, and uncovering how you support yourself and others through organizational change. So mark your calendars, and we will see you in San Francisco. You can find resources mentioned in this episode in our show notes in your podcast app or at teibelinc.com/podcast/144. Thanks, everyone, for downloading. On behalf of Howard Teibel and Ruth Johnston, I'm Pete Wright, and we'll catch you next week on Navigating Change, the education podcast from Teibel Inc.